Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see everyone here again this morning after a fun-filled day yesterday as well as last night, raising money for the National Conservation Foundation and allowing that organization to continue its work, partnering with local entities. And we're going to continue that discussion about partnerships today, as we've heard already so much about some of the themes that we can expect to hear from not only this panel, but the one to come with a little bit more of a government flavor. But we're going to start this morning with our panel discussions focused on some private sector entities and the work that they're doing in the sustainability space and how that might impact all of you and how you can partner with them on those efforts. Joined today by Stephen Wall with Syngenta. Appreciate you taking the time to join us here today, Stephen. Also with Robert Zemenchek of Case IH and CNH Industrial. And last but certainly not least, on my far left, your far right, Brooke Wall with Smithfield Foods. Once again, thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us. And I think just to kind of frame up the conversation, it would be helpful to kind of just walk us through what your respective companies are doing in the sustainability space, what those efforts look like, as well as what your kind of individual role in them looks like. So Steve, we can start with you on that.
Sure. So Stephen Wall, I'm with Syngenta, and I've been with the company for over 20 years now. And maybe I'll start with what I do. So I'm our development manager for sustainability, which is a corporate title that doesn't really mean anything, but basically that is something that says I work on a whole bunch of cool different sustainability projects here in North America. And at Syngenta, we've been involved in sustainability related to agriculture for a very long time. And we set our first targets and commitments related to sustainability over a decade ago. And going into that, we wanted to be able to address challenges that farmers would face so that we could help them as we were setting our targets. And you know, those challenges are many, right? So they have to produce more food using less inputs. There's always volatility, and whether that's with climate or weather, commodity prices, political unrest, all of that impacts what a grower is doing on a daily basis, on a season-to-season basis. They also have to deal with us as consumers. We always have changing needs and tastes. They have to be able to address those as well. They constantly need to be able to access funding, which sometimes can be a challenge. And importantly, for those that own their own land, they want to be able to pass that on to future generations. So at Syngenta, we said, okay, well, what can we do as we're setting our targets to help with that? And so we came up with our Good Growth Plan, which we recently refreshed in 2020. And that's based on 4 different targets and commitments. That's around innovating for farmers and nature, striving for carbon neutral agriculture, and also partnering for impact, which is an important piece that we're talking about today, and certainly keeping people safe and healthy. So just a little bit more granularity around that when we're talking about innovating for farmers and nature. So we've committed $2 billion over 5 years to bring innovations specifically developed for sustainable ag into the market. And 2 of those, at least 2 breakthrough innovations per year that we said that we will bring and are bringing into the market. When we talk about carbon neutral agriculture, so we want to be able to help enable and measure carbon capture and mitigation in ag. And we but actually improve biodiversity, 3 million hectares of rural land related to biodiversity every year. And we've committed to reduce our own carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. And then when I talk about people, keeping people safe and healthy, so we have a very big operation. We're a very large company. So we have a goal to have 0 incidents across all of our operations every year. And we train 8 million farm workers in the safe use of agricultural products every year as well. And we strive for fair labor across all of our supply chain. And then on partnering for impact, that's a big one for us. So we know that we can't do this by ourselves. So it's partnerships with groups like NACD and other groups out here in the audience that we are very proud of forming and creating a variety of different projects for that. And one that we're pretty excited about, and one I'll just highlight right now, is one we just launched in Wisconsin with NACD. So we have an agronomist on the ground there that is going out and reaching out to farmers and growers to talk about sustainability and conservation projects, try to help them understand how different practice changes can lead to different outcomes when they talk about sustainability, and see if that fits in their operation. Talk about how different conservation projects can improve how their operations work, what that farm's going to look like in the future. And also help them go out and access some funding, because that's a big thing. So being able to go out and fill out a whole bunch of forms to get those federal and state funding sources in those grants. So that's all something that we're very excited about today. And then with all that, we want to make sure that we're being transparent and being held accountable. So we routinely go out and talk to our stakeholders to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we can get some input that we're heading in the right direction or not. And also, we report on those every year, and those are go through a formal audit for us every year. So, yeah, thanks.
Very good. So obviously a lot of things going on at Syngenta. Appreciate the look at that. Robert, what can you tell us about things going on at Case IH?
Well, at Case IH and with our parent company, CNH Industrial, we embrace sustainability. And, you know, I had to sit back and step back and say why. Increasingly, our customers are coming to us with sustainability opportunities and improvements and suggestions and input into our product designs, into solving local, you might say, opportunities that they're facing in sensitive watersheds, fragile soils, different ecosystems, scarcity of water, as was mentioned before. And they produce great crops in these local markets and use our tools all over the world in 180 countries. So increasingly, our customers have come forward and mentioned that this is important to them. And we are very much a customer-driven company. Also, our suppliers and our own employees, 37,000 of them worldwide. It's important to them, too. As we recruit new employees, they're mentioning that this is important to them as well. So it's starting to make just good business sense to be a sustainably driven company. It's not to be fashionable. This is because it's the right thing to do by our customers, by our employees. Even our shareholders are now stipulating that they want this done. And so we have over 150 R&D projects that we have looked at very closely and that we have set decarbonization objectives and targets that by 2030 we will achieve. And this will, in the aggregate, reduce our carbon footprint by somewhere between 20 and 30%. We're committed to SBTI with those formally, and we're recognized by both Standard & Poor's and the Dow Jones Sustainability Index as a top sustainability company. We're in the top 1% of over 7,200 companies evaluated by those agencies. So we take this seriously. It's not populism for us. It's something deep and important at every level in our company, from the board on down. So you will see by the year 2024, every product that we launch will have a sustainability feature or benefit that a grower can see and recognize in his product, whether that's a tractor, a combine, hay and forage tools, or any of the implements. And we've already started down that road. You may notice that we've introduced methane-based propulsion that's no longer strictly diesel. And these are not just award-winning concept type things. They're actually for sale, running on farms. We're starting in Europe. We'll globalize that. So it's both CNG and LNG. You have to set up the infrastructure to support those things. And we're partnering with Benjamin and others who can take the wild methane sources that are sometimes cited in our livestock production system and convert that into usable bioenergy sources. And we will move and migrate gradually in an evolutionary way, not a revolutionary way, towards electrification. And we will move towards hybrids in various forms. I mean, there's no good reason we can't take lighting and air conditioning and radios and all kinds of things found in our products and use electric sources to power those. We don't need a diesel engine to do it for all time. So we're looking very closely at those as real solutions to decarbonize our fleet, which again touches 180 nations on the planet. And the world turns every 24 hours, so it can't just be here. It's got to go everywhere where we put these solutions into producers' hands and help them grow great crops, protect the soil, keep the water clean, and the air we breathe sustainable for our families, children, and local communities.
Very good. Thanks. Thanks, Rob. And now we've heard from the plant space. We've heard from the equipment space. Let's look over at the animal space. Brooke, with Smithfield, what can you tell us about the sustainability efforts in that neck of the woods?
Yep, thank you. So as far as my role within Smithfield Foods, I am our Senior Director of Sustainability. So I oversee our entire sustainability program, which as a global food company represents about 700 company-owned farms, about 500 domestically, 200 international. We have locations in Poland, Romania, and Mexico, a couple new facilities in Hungary and Slovakia. So our program is global. We've been in this space from a sustainability aspect for over 2 decades. We started our first environmental impact report in 2001 and have continued since. We are big proponents, obviously, of being good stewards to our animals and environment, and have a few great projects in the works that I'll go into a little bit later. But our program really revolves around 3 main areas, which is good food, good work, and good stewards. With good food, obviously, we're a global food company. We want to produce good food responsibly. And in doing that, we have a very robust food safety and quality program. All of our products are able to be traced farm to fork, and all of our manufacturing facilities are Global Food Safety Initiative certified, and that is globally as well. We also have a health and wellness pillar, which we focus on nutrition. We want to reduce the added sugars and added sodiums of our products, and our commitment is a 10% reduction by 2025. We also have another kind of adjacent market business, which is a Smithfield Bioscience, where we use our porcine-derived materials to create heparin sodium. And in 2021, Smithfield Bioscience was the #1 supplier of heparin sodium globally, which is a fascinating aspect to thinking about. We just have farms and we raise pigs, but we are actually in the pharmaceutical space as well. And so what that is heparin is an anticoagulant. The powder that we make is really used on medical devices to prevent clotting for different procedures. And obviously, we have an abundant source of that raw material coming directly from our processing plants. Our next one is Good Work, which covers our worker health and safety and helping communities initiatives, as well as DE&I efforts. We have committed $15 million to improving the outlook for minority farmers. So in 2001, we announced our first family that was part of that program. And last year, we added 3 additional farmers to that program. So we actually help fund them. We will get their farms back up to standard if they have older farms where they weren't able to get funding, and we'll contract with them to grow for us. In addition to the 500 domestic company-owned farms, we have about 2,100 contract growers that we partner with in the U.S. as well. And then finally, for good stewards, from an animal care standpoint, we are the largest supplier of hogs in the U.S. We have a very long-standing commitment to animal husbandry. We also, in 2020, completed our commitment of making all of our company-owned farms globally on a group house system, which there's probably been some knowledge of group house. And anyone heard of Prop 12? Yeah. So there's been a lot of discussion in certain areas about housing of these sows when they're pregnant. So again, all of our farms have been converted. And then from an environmental aspect standpoint, we have committed to be carbon negative by 2030, as well as a 30% reduction by 2030. And one of the most exciting ways we're going to get there is with our renewable energy projects. So we have manure to energy joint ventures. We have 2 currently that we're working on. One is Monarch Bioenergy, where we've partnered with Raceline, and then another one called Align, where we've partnered with Dominion Energy, which is more on the East Coast. And what we're doing is on our company-owned hog farms, we're actually converting the lagoons into anaerobic digesters, covering those and capturing that methane, which would have traditionally just been released into the atmosphere. We're able to capture that, clean it, send it to an upgrade system, and sell it directly back into the utilities as a carbon credit and a carbon positive renewable natural gas. And I believe the natural gas, according to the California carbon credits that we're providing, is one of the highest valued. So in addition to raising pigs, farmers are also making money off of their waste materials. So it is a very exciting time within our industry.
So I want to talk about the broader agricultural industry, because none of your respective companies exist, in a silo within it. You need grain to feed livestock. You need equipment to plant grain, and the cycle continues itself. So I'll just work the way back across the stage and start with you this time, Brooke. How does your company work with some of these other segments within the agricultural value chain to help achieve those goals? And do you see room for improved partnerships as well?
Yeah, so obviously grain is a huge input into our raw material, being the animal, the pigs themselves. We have done a lot of work with regenerative agriculture in that space and working with our grain providers. We have agronomists that we work very closely with, and we will actually pay for the agronomy services to help these farmers improve the yields on their croplands as well.
Yeah, the value chain in a crop production cycle goes all the way from the back of the combine, back through seeding and planting, and on through to the next harvest. And surely there are many people, our stakeholders in that process, including seed companies, extension, crop protection folks, and we partner with a number of those to get the input needed to drive value and utility back into our delivery systems, whether that's a planter or a combine or any such system. We're but a small but important part of that value chain. So for example, when we learned that neonics were a challenge for monarch butterflies and so forth, we immediately set to work to modify our planters so that off-target delivery was not to occur in our crops. And so we're open. We want to learn where we can be better. And we look for those opportunities from our industry partners and others who might have input for us.
Yeah, probably similar to Robert. I mean, we work across the entire value chain, whether it starts at the seed and goes through the planters and ends up on the table. And throughout all of that, we do try to focus on our sustainability aspects. We do provide some digital tools that are available that a lot of our value chain partners do use as well. I would say probably an area that we could improve on is really the public-private funding of different initiatives. So I think that's a big area that we could still explore within the whole sort of value chain concept.
So let's talk about that then, because if there's area for improvement, what would success in that area look like? I mean, is it more Department of Agriculture funding? Is it EPA partnerships? Is it federal, state, local? What do you think is the a good avenue for some of these folks to consider as you look at improving the public-private relationship on sustainability efforts?
Yeah, and I guess it would just be all of the above. I think going back to the farmer level, farmers need an easy button, right? So if we're asking them to change a practice, that's going to require perhaps an upfront equipment purchase, or it's going to cause a lag in their yield for 3 to 5 years. So it's going to hit their bottom line and the return on investment. So there's a gap there in funding that, why would I do that if I'm going to make less money? So there's certainly some bridge funding opportunities in there that I think are worth exploring, and it's kind of an exciting area, I think, that we could really try to look at that, because really we need a scale. We need more acres in different sustainability practices, more acres that provide different outcomes that we're all sort of striving for.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Robert, I want to bring you back in here, because one of the things that I always kind of wonder in this question is, obviously, you all know you have competitors in your respective business silos, and I'm not going to ask you to speak on behalf of them, but you all exist within, quite literally the same ecosystem in a lot of these places. Is there room for partnerships on some of these sustainability efforts between different private sector entities, knowing, of course, that sometimes we are talking about competitive business advantages as well, but is there room to work on that? Or are folks going to need to stay siloed and competitive in some of these spaces?
Oh, sure, we have a competitive landscape we live in. That's the business world, but we can't get there on our own. We'll need to work with partners, and we've already demonstrated our willingness to do that. We showed at CES 2 weeks ago our first electric tractor, 100% electric. That was with a partnership with Monarch Tractor out of Livermore, California. That's one example. So, there's technologies out there that we want to adopt, and we'll need to come together with folks to incorporate that into our existing platforms, make them better, make them more efficient, and that will also then lead to better outcomes. And I like to think of our efforts as outcome-based: better crops, better soils, cleaner water, better overall results that are truly sustainable. And we can get caught sometimes micro-analyzing maybe the technology, But in the end of the day, it's the outcome we're after. And I think with our partners, we can get there much quicker and much more boldly and powerfully than we ever could on our own.
Mm-hmm. Brooke, any thoughts on sort of that relationship between, yes, private sector competitiveness, but, shared environmental stewardship goals?
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting about the sustainability space when you're looking at business is it's one of the least secretive and competitive spaces. One, because everyone wants to let everyone know what they're doing, so it's very public. So it's typically not a secretive group. But from a funding standpoint, we've been very successful with some the joint ventures that I mentioned, trying to get the money to provide for these farms, specifically on our contract grower farms that want to convert their lagoons. We get funding through these joint ventures. We just had a recent investment by TPG Rise in our Monarch Bioenergy joint venture as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Folks, we've got a few more minutes with these panelists before we are going to move to a different conversation. I've got questions for days of my own, but I want to make sure you're all involved in the conversation as well. If you would like to pose a question to this panel, we do have a microphone there in the back of the room, or I guess toward the middle of the room. Please form a queue with that microphone if you'd like to get involved in this conversation. But Stephen, I do wonder, you have an audience here full of producers, people that work with producers, folks that might interact with government entities. I wonder, when you think of sort of the on-the-ground production aspect of all of this, what could folks in this room, perhaps do if you were to issue a request to them? What could they do to make, life a little bit easier for you and your partners on stage here in terms of making and achieving some of these sustainability goals?
Great question. I think for us here in Syngenta in North America, our main channel is through retail, right? So we don't necessarily always interact with growers all the time. We certainly have agronomists in place that do, but our reach isn't as broad perhaps as some of the other folks here in this room. So I think sort of exploring what that could look like in different projects on collectively us engaging on the ground with farmers, us being Syngenta and you being maybe the primary touch point is something that would be interesting to look at for us.
Yeah, we've taken the position of being open from the beginning and transparent. We do not, for example, in our data management that comes from our vehicles, we have not tried to cordon off, that space. Growers certainly have control over their agronomic data, but if anyone here wants to use our platform, they're welcome to. It's free. And if you have a farm, you can put your data on there, look at it, visualize it, put it on your phone. I only bring that example up to show that we want to work with everyone at the local level to find new tools, to visualize the problem to be solved, the data that can help us understand the problem, and then to get to a solution that betters us from what we did in the past. So growers are increasingly using these kind of tools and digitizing what used to be very manual and very cumbersome processes, and it's now moving at light speed. So we want to partner with anyone who's willing to use those sorts of approaches to solving what used to be difficult challenges. It could be soil conservation, residue management, riparian zone, and topographical visualization. All those different challenges that now can be fact-based and data-driven. I think there's an opportunity there that at the local level you might want to consider.
Yeah, and I'll say, kind of adding on to the data piece of it is, partnering with, any sort of reporting platforms that are available to you. I know from the Pork Board, they're working on some greenhouse gas inventory initiatives where farmers can actually capture their full inventory, and then we'll actually be able to utilize that as part of our Scope 3 inventory and put projects in place. I know there's some funding specifically in the state of Iowa for them to put projects in place to reduce their emissions. So we're always happy to partner with any state or federal agency that's got projects like that going to incentivize and help encourage our contract growers to participate in those programs, because our data is never going to be as accurate as possible without their input. Right now we do a lot of modeling and predictive metrics for the aspect of market hogs.
Very good. I see we do have somebody at the microphone. I would respectfully ask if you could give us your name, your location, and kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. I'm Sylvia Malm. I work with the Groundwater Protection Council and the National Source Water Collaborative. I'm based in Virginia. And my question is, for the work you do with growers, have you looked at USDA NRCS's national map of priority source water areas, which would give you a direct link to growers whose land work and has an impact on public drinking water sources? It would give you a public health benefit linked to your work.
That was probably towards me. So personally, I have not. I think other folks in our organization have. But yes, thank you very much for that resource. Yeah.
But to the broader subject, is there any additional kind of targeting geographically that any of the three of you consider when you're looking at outlaying maybe some on-the-ground projects?
Yeah, so we've just completed a full groundwater assessment tool that looks at our complete company footprint across the continental U.S. And what we've done is used the different climate predictive modeling to look at 2030, 2040, 2050, what that water availability and groundwater recharge is going to look like, to give us some areas to focus. So that's our next level, is we're going to be focusing on those areas where the recharge areas are lower. And the water scarcity is a much bigger concern, and put some measures in place and partner with some potentially local or regional conservation efforts to make sure that doesn't happen.
We've started to track things like cover crop adoption and to look where that has occurred. And so thank you for the USDA resources and that, parallel to the groundwater work that you mentioned. And so that's being mapped. So we know where those needs are, and that we have to deliver solutions for those growers so that they can participate in cover crop adoption and help conserve soil and nitrogen and other inputs. So yes, we do consult those databases and look for that, so we don't get stuck in a 3 I's plus Minnesota mentality. I'm not picking on 3 I's plus Minnesota, but it's 48, lower 48 plus, not any one little sub-region in particular.
Well, folks, we're looking at needing to wrap up things up here, so I do want to ask one kind of concluding question for the three of you. And I don't think anyone in this room has gotten into agriculture in the last couple of weeks. I think we've all been in the industry for a little while, and we've seen changes within the industry, not only from a production standpoint. Obviously yields have skyrocketed in the last 30 years, but from a sustainability standpoint, there's obviously been a drop in inputs required, a lot of progress in that area. So as we keep that framework in mind, Brooke, I'm going to start with you, and I guess we'll work back toward me on the stage here. What's possible? The next 30 years, when you think about the things in your company's portfolio, what's possible in this space?
Yeah, so I think for us, one of the most exciting spaces is being carbon negative, right? We'll have enough methane capture across our farms and between company farms and contract farms, where that will offset the emissions by our manufacturing facilities. I think that's the most encouraging space. You think about those lagoons would typically just be wide open, and all of that would just be released into the atmosphere. And if we can get majority of our contract growers to participate in those programs, the reduction of emissions from that process will be immense.
We certainly share the view that decarbonization is not only possible but probable. There will be emerging technologies that will take us to places we can only imagine at this point. We don't know what that looks like for powering vehicles, whether that's a new form of plasma containment. It could be anything. But I will say that in addition to carbon, we're going to need to solve the nitrogen equation, whether that's groundwater, runoff, effluents, and even the nitrous oxide emissions and methane volatilization that we see from the use of fertilizers and manure handling. We have to solve for nitrogen at the same time because that has huge implications as a GHG source along with CO2. So it's an entire pool of constituents that go into air quality, and we have to treat them with equal importance and not get too monolithic in our thinking that we're just CO2 managers. It's broad-based, and I'll just throw out that I'm also aware of we can't forget phosphorus and the effects that it has on water runoff, accelerated eutrophication, and other problems. So, it's a three-legged stool, really: carbon, nitrogen, and phos.
Yeah, and just sticking with the carbon theme, I think all of us can set carbon goals and hopefully meet those by 2030, 2050, whatever it may be. But I think having farmers be part of that, I know we're certainly made lots of strides within the past few years on that, especially related to the climate smart ag programs, but actually turning that into making it profitable for farmers, because they're going to be the ones putting it in the soil and trying to keep it there. So whether that's carbon, or the next thing would be biodiversity or water, whatever those outcomes would be, and those credits that you could stack together to actually have farmers be part of that, is hopefully where this is all headed.
This is obviously such a fun conversation to have in the present term, but it's always fun to talk about the future and what's possible, and why we're doing some of these things that we're doing on a daily basis right now, with the end goal of meeting some of these objectives that you and your respective companies are reaching toward. Folks, please thank me in joining these panelists.